Hi, welcome to Growth Quest. I'm here with a very special guest. It's Sulin, Head of Marketing from Maxis. Welcome to the show, Sulin.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what you do at Maxis.
So I look after the marketing team at Maxis, which means the offline marketing, the advertising, the insights, and also the digital marketing and web.
Okay, that's the entire gamut.
Yeah lah, it's marketing lah, right?
Yeah. So basically, what we're trying to do here is trying to understand how to grow and scale a business. What are some of the things that's working at Maxis in terms of given the size of what you're doing? Scaling is a bit hard, but I'm sure there are strategies you're putting in place. And maybe you can speak about some of those that would be relevant to a marketer today.
Yeah, I think when we started this kind of marketing journey a couple of years ago, and we looked at the marketing team, one of the things we said is it's a bunch of great people. How much better can we help them respond as a team? How much better can we help us respond as a team to the changes that are happening in marketing? So one of the things that I'm super conscious of is that I've been around since the old days, right? And so it's important to ask every couple of years, what's changing? What will make you obsolete over the next 3 years? And what we said is there are a couple of big changes. I think marketing has changed more in the last 3 years than it has changed in the last 20 years before that. If you look at just the area of decision making today, we are taught if you start as a marketer, you are trained in the art of positioning, and the art of positioning is the one thing that most of your customers, you should say to most of your customers to make them value you more. And I think that principle is actually being diluted somewhat. It was changing somewhat because of the different ways in which you can approach a customer. So you can approach a customer from different angles and different types of customers. So just like if I was trying to strike up a conversation with you or another guy, the first thing I would say to you, even though I'm the same person, the first thing I would say to you might be very different from the first thing I want to say to another guy. And that's the way that the platforms and the technologies in digital have allowed us to change in marketing. So the big thing there is if marketing has changed that much, what are the ways in which we should equip people to deal with these changes? You want me to continue?
Yeah, let's hear it, because what we're looking for are the tools.
Okay.
We're looking for the absolute tools that a marketing person could hit the ground running with.
Yes. Okay, so the first couple of things is that the vocabulary of marketing has changed, right? So if in the past you needed to understand a whole bunch of terms, there is now 1,000 new terms that without understanding that vocabulary, you can't actually do modern marketing. So people acquire languages quite slowly when we're adults. We learn a lot when we're 6 years old, but you need a little bit of a push. So for one of the things that my team has to do, for example, is that it doesn't matter what you do in my team. It doesn't matter what you do in the Maxis marketing team. It doesn't matter what job you hold in any one of our agencies. You can be creative, you can be a producer, you can be an events person. Every single person has to go through digital training and they have an exam. So that just forces that everybody has the same base knowledge that we can actually have conversations about data and digital with. So that's the first thing. So forcing everybody to have the same vocabulary. So that I think we do, and I think that's one of the things that has been most beneficial for us. The second thing is the kind of velocity that we have and the information that we have about our customer is now manifold. If in the past you only knew their IC number, how much they spent with you, their age and their gender and their language, now there's 100 different things like how recently did they visit your website, how long did they spend on a phone conversation with you, How many times do they call the call center? How many YouTube videos do they normally watch? Or how many hours of TV? So all that stuff, right, is so much data, and that can get really, really confusing for a lot of people, or they just don't know where to access it. So the alternative to that is, when there's so much data, there's two alternatives. One is that you deal with complexity by asking for summaries, okay? So that's a way in which a lot of people deal with it. They ask a data person to summarize for you and give you a PowerPoint. We don't think that that's useful, because a Marcom person and an events person and a digital search person and a social person might require different views of the same data. So the one other important thing is to be able to give everyone access to dashboards where they can look at their own view of data. So I think that that's something that we weren't very early in doing that, but we got that done, and we train people to be able to access their own data. So we don't look at someone else's summarized view of what a customer looks like to us. Each one of us can go and figure out and test out hypotheses about a customer. So that's a tool that benefits everyone in the team, but needs to be actually invested in by someone senior. So I think that's the second important thing. The third thing, I guess, is to think about, actually, it's very easy to tell an army of people, go do data, go do digital. It's actually harder to figure out, when you change your direction, are there processes in your system that are hard-coded in how your workflow, and if, for example, how you brief agencies or vendors. If the way in which you brief, if you've changed the way you market, but you haven't changed the way you brief an external party, or you haven't changed the way in which you review competitive information, or you haven't changed the way in which you've evaluated brand success, all those things slow your rate of transformation, because all those things set people's KPIs and all that kind of stuff. So this is the boring nitty-gritty stuff of change, which is going down to changing things, elements in your workflow and your processes and your policies to enable people to not hit roadblocks and barriers. So I think those three things: people, giving them language, giving them tools to be able to access data on their own computers, not just look at a summarized chart. And the third thing is actually the third important boring boss work is literally going down and identifying all the processes that need to be reworked and reviewed. Yeah.
Right. And in Maxis's digital transformation journey,
Yeah.
What has been one of the biggest roadblocks or impediments, and how did you try to overcome that?
I'll shrink it a little bit, because digital transformation for a telco means a lot of things. It means how you deal with OTT partners. It means how you do how you train your front line in your call center and all that stuff. So I don't do any of that stuff. A lot of very smart people in Maxis do all that stuff. So I just look at digitizing the marketing workflow and the marketing strategy. I think we've been very lucky in the sense that the usual roadblock that I hear from my people that I know that carry a similar role in other companies is that you have to convince the boss. I've never had that problem. Like, I've never actually had to say why. I've never had to make an argument for why should you digitize. You only make arguments for what is the best approach, what is the best use of time and resources in all the options you can look at in terms of digitization. So the good news is, if you work in a company that doesn't require you to convince a person more senior than you to digitize, then you can spend all the time just evaluating what should we spend resources on, what should we invest in, what tools do we need, what technologies do we need, what kind of people training programs do we need. So there hasn't been a serious roadblock in all these things. It's about making sure that we make the right is making sure we don't just listen to the hyperbole. You know, there's a lot of people giving snazzy promises of all the different things you can do. The decision here is not about the lack of choices of the things you can do. It's what you choose to narrow down in what you want to do, what you should do. Yeah.
Okay. You know, everyone talks about what should be done, but
Yeah.
I think maybe we should focus on what shouldn't be done. Like, what's the biggest mistake? What's the biggest mistake that a marketer could make today?
I think a common mistake is that there are two common mistakes, but they're linked. I think one common mistake is that a lot of is in the way we organize, how we digitize, right? One of the commonest mistakes is actually putting digital in a specialized group of people only. Yes, you need, you know, domain expertise if you're thinking about, you know, setting up an e-commerce store, doing search, doing social. But to say that only that team does digital and not force the rest of the other people to understand digital vocabulary, that's, I think, a really common mistake, because then that team is the only team trying to digitize. You can actually digitize anything. You can change the way in which you do research. You can change the way in which you analyze call center data. There's a lot of different things there. So narrowing the scope of digitization to only IT or web marketing or digital marketing people is the most common mistake. The second one is actually because a lot of big brands, we have agencies. And a lot of times we tend to devolve a lot of the early work in digitizing. There's a temptation to say that they're the experts and therefore give them the top line direction and let them figure out the rest. I think that there is no more important task that you have as a marketing director to define your target audience, to define who your customer is, what the insights are. And to do that today, you need to understand digital segment criteria. You need to understand what the signals are that you can, what the metrics are there. So work with the agencies, but the ownership should always sit with the brand. The people that know the most about your customer is the brand. So being able to define that customer on digital platforms should be, the ownership should reside within the brand.
So it seems like the advice now is to get your hands dirty. You need to roll up your sleeves and actually dive into the data and try to get a bit more granular. But where do you draw the line?
I think that it's also about whether or not you find it fun. I find it fun. I think that marketing's never been more fun. I've been in marketing for almost 20 years, and I don't think I don't think there's been any time that it's more fun than it has been in the last 3. I think the ways in which we can define opportunities to speak to a customer, so different. You know, the ways in which we can profile a customer, so different, so exciting, that it's. I draw the line at what I don't find exciting, I guess. So we work with the. I think the big thing is, choose the people you want to work with and have the same excitement about this world, whether that's hiring talent into your team or partnering talent with an agency or with a Google or a Facebook, and partner the right people. And then it's actually, if everybody's equally curious about this world, it's then a journey of learning and testing and trying and pruning together. So I have a big difficulty, I guess, with drawing where that line is, because I find it fun. I find it, why wouldn't anyone want to be interested in this?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things today, and where people talk about the next shiny thing, the next big thing, and stuff like that. What, in your experience, have you found that really, really works? You know, what is your black book, so to speak?
As the next, I'm probably born a skeptic. Okay, so I'm probably born a skeptic. So if somebody tells you that this one thing is the next big thing, I discount the credibility of their whatever they're going to say in the next 60 minutes by about 10%. They might still recover, but I think the longer you work in this business, the longer you find that no one thing is the next big thing. All of this is the next big thing. Understanding first-party data is the next big thing. Understanding influence networks is the next big thing. Migrating insights from survey data to behavioral data is the next big thing. Video is the next best thing. Mobile is the next big thing. So all of it is. If any one person says that this one thing is the next best thing, next big thing, it's probably because they're selling that thing. And so you should discount what they're going to say next.
What has worked for you, though, of all these big things? What is really that you found real world success?
I'm not trying to avoid your question, but the true answer is all of it can work if you know what it's working towards. I think that every person that has said this thing doesn't work for me, 80% of the time, maybe they didn't ask themselves that question. What is this thing working for? Is this thing recruiting new users for me? Is this thing about driving web traffic and footfall, or is it about driving footfall into my offline stores? Is this thing about creating a certain reputation for the brand? If you know what you want to use any one of these new platforms for, then you can design a program that makes that happen. Then all you do, you never say it doesn't work. Very rarely do we try something new and say, oh my God, the whole thing doesn't work. Most of the time we say that, what we learned from it is it works better when you say this message versus when you say this message. Or this platform works better amongst this group of people and less well amongst this group of people. I don't think we've really ever said something that we've tried to do, that thing doesn't work at all, or that thing works in all cases. So it's always about learning what you want to achieve and then pruning the strategy a little, gardening the strategy a little to make sure that it optimizes to the objective you set out for. But that's just marketing common sense, no?
Yeah. It's not very common sometimes.
Yeah, I think most people acknowledge that anything that I said just now would be the logical approach, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. What are some of the traits, since we're talking about marketing common sense, what are some of the traits that a marketer today should have? I think we covered that a little bit earlier, but like someone in your team, what would you expect to have in your team? What are the things that you value? Okay,
if we believe that the rate of change is accelerating in our business, then the most important thing to have, in my view, is curiosity. So the most important thing is to be interested, to not just look at your task and be really good at doing your task and to be more efficient in this task, but every now and then you're always on the lookout for what new things could disrupt the way I'm working. So you can't train curiosity. You can't train curiosity in an adult, I believe. You can only find people who are intrinsically, they can't help themselves but be kepo. They can't help themselves but be nosy about, or stuff, or they can't help but want to learn a new language, or all that stuff. You can always find the traits of curiosity. I think that's the most important thing for when I hire or when I look at an agency partner. We don't really look at experience as much as we look at curiosity, the willingness and the ability to question constantly. I think that is even more true if you look at managers. So the problem is managers will have a built-in bias to operate off experience, because all of us, we use a mental shorthand of experience. These things have worked in the past, and therefore we should continue using it. Of course, if you've got a lot of experience, you're like, why don't I use that, right? And I think the most important thing with managers is managers who are willing to discount their own experience, that they're humble enough or have the humility to say that whatever I have learned all these years have an expiry date. everything that I learned, whether in school or in my first few years of marketing, a lot of them have an expiry date, because if the conditions or the environment in marketing changes, some of these things that we learned to be true before are no longer true. So the most important thing for a manager is that they're willing to say that a lot of things that I have in my head are now expired. So I think that those are the two things: curiosity for staff and for agencies, and the humility to admit that, the humility to unlearn something that has been part of their experience.
Okay. Now, some of the buzzwords today are influencer marketing. People talk about influencer marketing, content marketing. What is your experience with influencers, and how can a company or a marketing department actually leverage influencers?
Like a lot of buzzwords, again, figure out which objectives benefit from influencers. We take a very different view of influencers. I think our most successful influencer campaign has been one that takes the employees as our primary influencers. So when we were starting to do brand transformation a couple of years ago, we also looked at, can we affect the kind of people who want to join Maxis as an employee, our attractiveness in the employee market. So employer branding, you call that. And instead of actually thinking of doing ads, we're like, well, we have 3,000 employees that are a dormant influencer group. How can we make these 3,000 employees much more valuable as active as an influencer group, and then you use the principles of influencer marketing on these people. Well, one thing is that they probably need to have things that we give them that they feel automatically like talking about. So looking at our employee benefits and creating some brag-worthy ones, right? So that people automatically want to Instagram or talk about at their dinner parties or talk about with their families and friends. So that's one thing. But the second thing is, maybe a lot of people don't know how to be influencers. So we worked with LinkedIn to help people actually kind of learn how to use LinkedIn as a platform so they can actually be active influencers just by having a great LinkedIn profile that talks about their work at Maxis. So some of that stuff is like, to your question, I mean, influencers can be anybody. They can be your dealers, your frontliners, and your employees. And having an open view that they're just not the YouTubers or a blogger makes you think more, I guess, openly about what influencer marketing could be.
Fantastic. Advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I was a really bratty young person, so I think that my younger self was curious, but not humble. So I think that perhaps I could have learned a lot more when I was younger if I wasn't such a bloody smart aleck, like trying to prove that I knew more or whatever. And if I had been more approachable and less of a brat, I guess, maybe I would have met more people that would have taught me a lot more things, and I would be a lot smarter than I am, actually, by being a little bit less bratty. So advice to younger self is stop being a brat.
Okay. Right. I guess everyone needs can be a little bit more humble.
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely. Okay, that's pretty much wraps it up. Maybe just any parting words, any advice, 2 or 3 things that a marketer can do today to hit the ground running.
A lot of it is about learning and unlearning. I think the more senior you are, the more you need to unlearn. If you're fresh, all kudos to you. You don't have a lot to unlearn, but learning isn't something that can be done passively. It has to be. You have to invest in it like it's part of a marketing initiative. Like you need to set goals, deadlines, criteria for learning, and if we don't do that, this adapting to a new type of marketing is going to be hard. So I think treat learning treat organizational learning for your team as something that is as worthwhile investing in as a technological tool. I think that it's actually the most valuable investment. Before you even invest in a dashboard or marketing automation, invest in getting everybody in your team, in the organization, to acquire data vocabulary, because otherwise that technological investment in a tool or automation isn't going to be as utilized as if the first thing was done.
Fantastic. Are there some learning hacks that you practice yourself, some of the hacks that you do? Because obviously there's just so much information around. Mm-hmm. How do you distill that? How do you just grab the relevant bits? Are there any tips or tricks? Or?
Hire a lot of really curious people, and so everybody contributes to the group learning. Hire a lot of really curious people and force the sharing session on a regular basis. You learn together, much easier than learning as a soloist.
Okay. In terms of hiring, is there like one question that you usually
I have
ask?
a lot, but I'm not going to tell you this.
Okay.
but if curiosity is true, there's a question for curiosity. If the ability to roll your sleeves up and actually dive into data is a thing, there's also questions for that as well. So you can always tell if somebody has just read like 3 Wikipedia articles on something versus somebody who's rolled up their sleeves and done it themselves. You can easily tell that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have you on this show.
It was fun. Thank you.